Yeah. Good morning. You are listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. On this show, we will try to tell you what's happening and what you can do about it. Today, I'll be interviewing Miguel Acosta. He's a local activist, co-director of Earth Care, and a member of the Retake Our Democracy Board of Directors. We'll talk about election, COVID relief, New Mexico State legislative session, climate justice, the obelisk, and the latest on Earth Care and Yucca and what they're up to. But before we get to Miguel, as usual, I've got to make a few announcements. First, I just want to remind you that last week I interviewed another activist and actually a good pal of Miguel's, and that was former state senator Eric Griego, director of Working Families Party of New Mexico. We broke down the 2020 election, and there were quite a number of interesting observations that Eric made. He's been on the show probably more than anyone, 3 or 4 times at least, and it's always a great interview. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you want. You can watch all of our radio shows by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and hovering over the Actions and Events page menu, and you'll see below there Retake Conversations, and that's where all of our shows going back to, I think, March when COVID really started to take off. And all older shows are at ksfr.org, and there you only get radio. While you're at the website, please check out our Zoom scheduled for December 1 with Speaker Brian Egolf and Senate Leader Peter Worth. Go to retakeourdemocracy.org and hover over the Actions and Events menu again, and you'll see this Zoominar right at the top. We'll be discussing the election results. We'll be talking about what might be possible in the 2021 legislative session and how the election has impacted what might be possible and how COVID is impacting what might be possible. And so it should be a very, very interesting conversation. And we'll be asking them some tough questions. And in the last 30 minutes of the show or the Zoominar, you can ask those questions yourself, tough ones if you want. They're used to them. Well, that's enough for now. Before I turn to Miguel, though, I did want to do a quick comment on COVID. It is getting absolutely out of control. And even in New Mexico, which had managed to contain this pretty well for a long time. And there's really one reason, and that is we're getting careless. We're getting tired of COVID. Is requiring a lot of us, and I think a lot of us are experiencing COVID fatigue. And so people are starting to have small gatherings at their home with people they probably think are being pretty safe. And it only takes one person to have had one kind of contact that was careless or just unfortunate, and that whole group of people can become infected. Right now, CDC is recommending that no one spend more than 15 minutes with any other individual outside your household in 24 hours. And that's at 6 feet distance with masks. So that makes a pretty big crimp in Thanksgiving for most of us. And as sad as that is, this year has been brutal in that respect. This is the first year in my kids' lifetimes, our 3 kids, that we haven't seen any of them in the calendar year, and it ain't gonna happen soon. So we've just got to buckle down and take care of this. And maybe in January, when Biden takes over, we'll actually start getting some national action and then the vaccine. So be safe. That's enough for now. So let's turn to a true local hero and a pal, Miguel Acosta. Welcome, Miguel.
Hey, how you doing, Paul? Thank you for having me on again.
Yeah. You're another one of our frequent guests. So I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. And while many of our listeners probably know who you are, tell us how you wound up becoming an activist and what your role there is at Earth Care.
Well, currently co-director at Earth Care. And I ended up doing community-based, activist or organizing work after someone just asked me this the other day. And actually the first time that I saw people experience sort of injustice and organized resistance to it was with Old Man Daley in Chicago and his gentrification efforts to destroy what was the original Mexican settlement in Chicago. Ultimately, he succeeded, but inspired a whole generation of folks that continued fighting against the Daley machine and the democratic machine in Chicago. Right. So that's what I've been, and then obviously the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement, all those things had a great impact on me. And I've been doing it ever since in different ways, shapes, and forms.
Yeah, well, you certainly have. Well, it's certainly been an interesting 10 days. What's your reaction to the national election and Trump resistance? The man is deluded. What's going on? What's your reaction?
Well, the definitely relieved, right, that he didn't win, especially not with some kind of like huge mandate, right? That would have been really terrible. And I kid you not when I tell you that a lot of us, a lot of folks have been, having conversations about where do we go if he wins.
Yeah.
And I was going to move back to Mexico where it's safe. So definitely a relief. But there's things that we need to keep an eye on. One, that there were so many people who made a conscious decision to vote for fascism, right?
Yeah.
And whatever excuses they make, that's basically the decision they made to vote for a racist, vote for a white supremacist, just all the negative things, right, that he represents. The other thing that so Biden and Kamala are there. That doesn't mean that we're done. That doesn't mean we've won.
Right.
It means that we dodged the bullet. Right.
We get a chance to survive, maybe.
But so now the work actually needs to intensify, right, on the Biden administration and at the congressional level, as well as the local and state level. We can't let go of keeping an eye on what happens here locally. We're going to have elections coming up soon for mayor, which we definitely have to give a lot of attention to. City council, school board, community college, all these things locally have a big impact on our lives.
Have you heard anything about anybody running for mayor?
Not yet, but as usual, I assume half the council is going to run, which is good, right? That's what democracy is about, having people. I just hope it's not another divisive candidate, right? I hope it's somebody that can bring it together and do some things differently here. So on the national level, yeah, we got to keep an eye, not just keep an eye, keep working on planning for 4 years from now, basically, right? And creating a better and more just, more democratic country, so that there's a different context next time we have presidential national elections.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the last thing too is that even though there were like bits and pieces, spots here and there, small headlines about the Latino vote or Latinx vote or Mexican American vote, depending on where you were at in the country, African American vote, very little about the Native American vote. But if it hadn't been for people organizing Black Lives Matter and the African American community, if it hadn't been for people organizing for Latino and immigrant rights, right? If it hadn't been for like 97% of the Navajo Nation coming out in support of Biden, we might not have had these results, right? And that needs to be acknowledged on the one hand, but also folks need to say the Democratic Party has to do more than just call us every 4 years.
Yep.
Right?
I don't know if you saw it, Miguel, but the blog I did a couple of days ago was focused on the different approach in Georgia, which wasn't coming from the Georgia Democratic Party. It was coming from Stacey Abrams and
right.
Fight organization, but they registered 1 million voters in
Yeah.
just, oh my God, phone's ringing, what we don't need. Uh, I always remember to take it out, but not this time. So I think that it's very important that we don't just acknowledge that work, but the Democratic Party needs to start funding that work, and not funding it like 8 weeks or 8 months before an election, but the day after an election, and really start educating and motivating people to want to vote, to care about the issues. Here in New Mexico, I spoke with Marg Elliston, the head of the Democratic Party. And I said, you know, Retake does these Zooms for a couple hundred people a month on public banking, Health Security Act, you know, these different issues. And they're educating people and motivating people to care and understand why their vote for legislature is important. And why doesn't the Democratic Party do this? I mean, you'd have a much bigger audience, and you have access to people we don't have access to, just because you do have a bigger audience. And she goes, oh, great idea. And then she never did it. And so, you know, that's just another aspect of this work, is that we need to transform the Democratic Party of New Mexico. So it's an organization that's organizing our Democrats and educating everybody in the community, so that some independents kind of listened up and go, oh, well, maybe the party's starting to walk a different talk. Is that a word? Talk a different talk, walk a different talk. Anyway.
Walk. You know, and we've been talking about this for years. You know, that not just the Democratic Party, but all the sort of the funding mechanisms need to invest in civic infrastructure. Right. It doesn't have to just be partisan leadership development. Imagine, for example, in the high school, at the high school levels, where the schools are struggling the most to engage students, especially those that were already on the margins. Imagine if we had had a good civics education program, a good civic infrastructure, so that young people in high school were already connected to community and doing, you know, work. The engagement would already be there, whether they're in school or whether they're learning from home.
Exactly.
The important things would already be happening in their lives, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I had an interesting conversation with Fred Nathan at Think New Mexico, and you know, he's advocating for a financial literacy requirement in high school, and we didn't talk about it, but civics would also fit there. But what it leads to is they don't learn about relationships, they don't learn about sexuality, they don't learn about nutrition, I mean, in any meaningful way, in an applied way. And civics would fit fiscal literacy. So no wonder kids are bored at school, but beyond it, they come out of school ill-prepared to be adults, to be a parent. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, so, and you know, some of the thing is by design, right?
Of course, that's how you, of course.
That's how you convince 70 million people to vote for an idiot like Trump, right?
Yep. And that started 50 years ago with the funding of public education, you know, part of a oligarchic plot, and two lefties exchanging things we've understood for years. How about the state election? Any thoughts on that? We've certainly altered the composition of the legislature over the last 4 years. Does this raise your hopes that some kind of meaningful legislation could pass this time?
Well, yeah, definitely, yes. You know, the shift towards the middle, I think, you know, people are saying it's a shift to the radical left. There was a shift towards the middle. And I think that it's a good thing for that. That's where we could get now, right? There definitely needs to be more work towards a more encompassing not Democratic Party, but, you know, democratic movement within at the state level. So in general, it was good, and hoping that we can get not just legislation, but start creating a whole new framework for how we invest in people and how we invest in communities, rather, and how we invest in corporate giveaways and continued extractive economies, right? You know, there's hope for a permanent fund, support for early childhood education and all those other things that it needs to be supporting. There's hope for some support for a public bank, right? There's hope for some support for community solar, right? Although it was disappointing to see the PNM move on PRC, and putting it in the sort of in the lap of the corporations now that they can appoint their own members. But hopefully we can work on that later. That was I guess the most disappointing, not the only disappointing, but the most
Right.
disappointing.
I would
But
agree.
in general, it was good, and we're looking forward to a better session. One of the big questions is whether the governor will be there or not. She may be already packed on the train to DC by then. We don't know, and whether they're going to meet in person or not. And there's conversation about them convening for a day and then ending the session and then calling for a special session later in the spring that would actually be the regular legislative session, right? Or cover the legislative agenda.
The problem with that, though, is if that happens, I was talking to Eric Griego about this yesterday, and if that happens, then the agenda is entirely set by the governor because it's a special session. And so she determines what's germane. And our experience with that is that gas and oil would get a pass once again, and a number of other kinds of things. So,
although at that point it may be Howie making creating the agenda.
Yeah. Well,
could be different. Yeah.
So, I just need to remind our listeners that they're listening to KSFR 101.1 FM, your public radio station, and this is Retake Our Democracy. And I'm Paul Gibson, and we're speaking with Miguel Acosta, the co-director of Earth Care. And before we get back to him, I want to just emphasize that KSFR is, while it's a nonprofit organization, relies upon tons of volunteers like myself. They also have some costs, and they just had a pledge drive. And if you missed it, I'd strongly encourage you to go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button at the top, and look at it as your price of admission to some really good programming. So please do that if you can. So Miguel, if all this legislative election stuff isn't enough to keep us occupied, we have the obelisk. And I see the mayor is calling for punishing those responsible for pulling it down to the full extent of the law. I'm guessing you have a different perspective. What's up?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated situation, but I thought it totally just wrong, to be sort of making this call for a posse, right, to chase down them criminals, right, them cattle rustlers that came in, and it was very, very in keeping, sort of with the settler, colonial mentality, right? Go after them folks that came into our town and caused the trouble, right? But it also doesn't match the rhetoric, right? So if we're going to talk about justice and reconciliation and truth and all that, then they should also be simultaneously, even though it's these folks are long gone, but looking at the original harm, right? So those folks that created the monument in the first place, right, should be also prosecuted, right? In absentia, obviously, right? But those two things should be connected, right? The conversation should be historic. It shouldn't just be reactive. We should be talking about both of those things simultaneously. That's how you build truth and reconciliation. But also there was lots of missed opportunities going back even to previous administrations. A lot of folks that are complaining about that feel harmed over the demolition or the tearing down of the obelisk are not as concerned about the obelisk as they are about other things that have happened over the last few years, right? The cancellation of the entrada, the conversations around Spanish conquest and colonization, all of these things, and all the sort of the social community processes that are connected to this, the social capital aspects of this, right? That have been lost, need to be replaced with something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in the Chicano community, the Hispano community, or Spanish, if that's the term that they most identify with, these things were important parts of that community. And then when you take these things away, they need to be replaced with something else, right? There has to be other forms for people that come together, build identity, build community, create status, create sense of belonging, and then be able to that's sort of part of the civic infrastructure formation, and then contribute to the rest of the world as you prepare within these processes. That's been lost to a large sector of the community, and that has to be attended to. Not that we should bring back the entrada, but there's something else that has to be happening, and nobody except potentially nativist reactionary voices are being the loudest, right? And we know a lot of these people, right? And so all the complaints are about all of it, not just about the obelisk, right?
Right.
That just becomes a current target. In terms of what happens, even and you wrote about this, the constitution of this committee or commission that he called for creation of, it's too, by trying to include everybody, you're excluding everybody, right?
Well, you're excluding the people who really need to be, and diluting their voice, and with only 3 indigenous and 3 explicitly Hispanic activist people out of 21, then you're not getting the full impact of and the diversity of those communities. I mean, what are they? Tribal governors and Janine Yazzie, or just some one token activist, Nick Estes.
It's when diversity becomes the enemy of equity, and in many instances, diversity is the enemy of equity, right? And you're right. I mean, there's some original conversations that have to be had, and the rest of us need to be supportive of those. I agree. I agree. So not sure what's going to happen going forward. And then sort of the public. And this is very Trump-like. I've been surprised at how Trump-like some of the local responses from government, from leadership have been. Singling out Three Sisters Collective, singling out Red Nation, singling out folks. It's almost like putting a target on their back and saying, we were fine until, these guys did what they did, right? Totally outrageous for them to be doing that. Right?
And I'm guessing they're not going to be among the stakeholders at that chart table unless we push. They'll be marginalized, and there's an absence of understanding or public discourse around what happens when you ignore a problem forever, and it's even worse when you promise you're going to address it and then nothing happens. Well, there's some culpability there as well, because apparently the only way it's going to get done is if somebody just does it. And we've seen it throughout the country. And, we've got a mayor who's made a commitment about this. And it would have been good for him to have taken more on the chin than he did, and to be a little less or a little more empathic about the people who ultimately took this into their own hands.
Right.
So Retake has a longtime supporter, Linda Marianello, who has been writing to me for weeks to write something or to do something on this show about this asphalt plant that is being proposed for Southside Santa Fe. And I know you're involved in the resistance to that. So can you fill us in on that issue, and maybe a little bit about what listeners can do about it?
Yeah, so that there's a hearing December 2nd, and I don't have the information in front of me, but I can send it to you so that people can be aware of it. There's a hearing December 2nd with the New Mexico Environment Department. We'll be hearing the petition, the request for clearance for an operating permit, right? And basically this asphalt plant, part of it already exists. They're sort of next door to Riverside Mobile Home Park. So it's north of Airport Road, right before you hit 599. So their proposal basically is to move it across 599 over into the county and expand operation to potentially 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Wow.
which would be allowed on that side of the line, right, outside of the city. So there's, they keep promising, but we're not planning for that. But the request is actually, that they be allowed to have that potential. So it's a concern because asphalt is a known pollutant. It's known to have harmful, the production of it, right, is known to have harmful impacts on communities. And especially the young and the elderly and folks with pre-existing, health conditions. So right now, all of those things are exacerbated by COVID-19. Right? Up until now, with the existing plant, there's been complaints of, the smell, the fumes, the dust, the traffic, the diesel trucks coming through, the rubber that, also gets, becomes particulates and goes up into the air. There's times when it's worse, depending on how the wind blowing, but the wind blows pretty much in that from west to east. So people are getting that, and sometimes northwest to southeast. So like Linda's community and in Tierra Contenta will also get the fumes. There's county offices right next to where the plant is, and they've got an operating facility there already, right? So they're consolidating them. County workers that work next door complain about headaches and fumes and smells and all the rest. So there's lots of evidence that this is having an impact. But based on the sort of the checkoff list that the state requires, we're not sure that they'll deny the permit. It looks like they probably will, right? And there's been
Probably will approve it, you mean?
Yeah. There's been there was a recent, I think it was Supreme Court decision, that the state Supreme Court, that says something about health, potential health impacts aren't one of the things that can be considered. And that's not the exact language of it, but there's a gist there that we, just claiming that this could potentially have harmful impacts is not enough to stop it. So, so December 2nd, we're bringing our folks anyway. So, we've got folks and where they're looking to move it to would actually be across from Cottonwood Mobile Home Park, and also what do you call it, Camino Real School, Camino Real Academy. All the new development that's going up over there, the new middle income and higher income housing. So all those folks are going to be, so I'm hoping that the real estate industry understands that this could potentially be harmful to their business as well. Because, building having a nice home downwind from the fumes
from an asphalt plant.
Yeah, I don't know if that's where you want to go live, right?
Well, if the privileged are impacted, you have that,
Yeah, so we're hoping the real estate folks understand that this is of concern to them too. So my thinking, and we've got the New Mexico Environmental Law Center now representing us as well. So they've seen that this is
great. They're going to be on the show next week.
So this is something that, that they see as a real concern, is primarily people of low income and people of color and immigrant communities that are affected. It's an issue of environmental justice or injustice, economic issues. There's all sorts of things involved. Right?
So you're going to get me information on that, and I'll definitely write about it in the blog. And we'll promote a comment for the December 2nd hearing. And we're out of time now. I'd encourage our listeners who are listening on the radio to check out retakeourdemocracy.org, go to the actions and events menu and hover over conversations, retake conversations, because Miguel and I are going to talk about COVID a little bit, and earth care and yucca and other local issues on that podcast. But that's all we have time for the radio show. And I want to remind our listeners that next week, and Miguel set this up for me, didn't do it on purpose, but we'll have Executive Director of the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, Virginia Necocheo, and longtime staff attorney, New Mexico Environmental Law Center, Eric Jantz. And we'll talk about this issue. I'll make sure we talk about it again. And so that's it for today. And I just encourage you to be safe, stay healthy, stay hopeful, and keep active. We're going to need all your support and help if we're going to flip both those Senate seats in Georgia, and information about that is on our website as well. So thank you, Miguel, for being with us. We're going to hold tight here for a second, and then we'll start on the podcast. Okay, we're back with Miguel Acosta, a little more casual environment. Let's shift on to happier news. COVID.
Well, let me finish a little bit on the
yeah. You got more on the asphalt? Go for it.
Yeah, so the senators representing us, we've got local residents in the trailer parks and also Tierra Contenta that are signatories, that are being those represented, right? We're looking at this as a good opportunity to do some cross-cultural organizing. North of airport and south of airport, right there, Contenta and the mobile home parks, and we're pretty convinced that the work is going to be at the county level, right? Because even after the state environment department gives the okay, the county has to give the final operating permit, right? And I think that's where the battle is going to be, is convincing them first to not give the permit, but also to rethink the zoning of the area as industrial.
Right.
This came out of their last plan, the Santa Fe County Sustainability Plan. They moved all the industrial zoning to the area. A lot of people did this 5 years ago. A lot of us weren't paying attention to that part of it, right? Because there wasn't like a whole lot of industry developing. The battle back then was more about Galisteo Basin, if you remember, right? About keeping things out of Galisteo Basin. So anyway, so I think that's where the heavy lifting is going to be, is with the county on that asphalt plant.
Well, we'll still try and see if we can't head this off at the pass on December 2nd.
Yeah. So so the connected to the next question about the COVID-19. So those areas immediately east of where this asphalt plant, the state identified, and they're now not giving this information out, but through some friends who I worked at the Department of Health for a couple of years, right? So some friends that worked there, we did a webinar, Zoominar, a couple of months back, because here in Santa Fe, the concentration for COVID-19 initially started in the downtown area, where the highest infection rates were, or reported infection rates were, but it quickly shifted towards the southwest. Right? And 87507 became the spot, the zip code in the city that had the most COVID infections reported. And this was, and our question was, well, where in 87507, right? Is it the areas south of airport? Is it Tierra Contenta and all these areas? Or is it north of airport in the mobile home parks? And also, what's the testing rate, right? So apparently, so what we found out, checking with some friends at Department of Health, was that in fact, yes, our fears were real. The 11 hotspots at that point in Santa Fe were all mobile home parks north of Airport Road, right? And they also had the lowest testing rates at that point. So they were.
Why am I not surprised?
They were reporting the highest levels, even though, right, they were the least likely to have been tested, right? So imagine what the real numbers could look like, right? And of course, the city and the county and the state had not set up any convenient testing centers down there. Eventually, they did organize, the city and with some support from Somos, organized 2 or 3 testing days, right? Not continuous, but just dates already at one of the schools down there. And finally, last week, I think it was, or possibly this week, they opened up a regular testing site next to the police station over off of Cerrillos and Airport. So now there's something that's more convenient, but the state also embargoed neighborhood level data, right? So now we can't access that information. State employees at the Department of Health can't access that information to find out.
Did they give a reason for that? Did they give a reason for it?
It wasn't even a public announcement. We found this out from our friends in the Department of Health, right?
Because I've been very positive and supportive of the governor on her response to the COVID, but you know, I've been looking at it reasonably superficially, and you can only look at it superficially if you don't get that kind of data. Do you
Yeah.
have any ideas about why that that population would be more predisposed to contracting COVID? I mean, is it because that's the core of our essential workers working in Target?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. So, and that's also one of the reasons why they haven't wanted to make this like a public health initiative, right? Or focus. So, you know, so that's where the workers for the hotels, for tourism, for the restaurants, for the grocery stores, you know, that's where all those, that's where the majority of that working population lives. So that's one of the reasons that they're more susceptible. Another reason is because there's such a huge lack of resource and investment in the area. So they're the ones that can can't afford to stay home, right? You
right,
know, can't work from home, but also can't stay home, can't receive resources locally because there's nothing there, right? So they're the most likely to have to leave the neighborhood to go find groceries, to go find recreation, to go find everything that goes into like some semblance of quality of life, right? So they're potentially the most mobile. So when you tell people stay home and whatever, it's hard, right? When the nearest park is 3 miles away, you know, the grocery stores are all over on Safarano. You know, everything, employment is across town. You know,
you're taking public transportation to get there.
yeah, yeah. You know, when you go somewhere, you take all the kids because you know you don't want to leave them at home, right? So they're, you know, we travel in packs, right? So it's a situation that's just sort of perfect storm.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
You know, and to do, because I was talking with some folks from the Albuquerque Journal, right? You know, they were interviewing, you know, to do what the NBA did, right? Do some kind of bubble would mean, you know, keeping folks resourced at home for, you know, 3 to 4 weeks. But that means also resourcing the hotel owner, the restaurant owner, you know,
right.
and everybody else. And there's been real resistance here to shutting down. You know, so why the embargo? Why, you know, and in general, I think she has done a better job than most governors in the country in
Right.
terms of keeping things better here. But you know, and now, you know, it's not just that population. Now, like we were saying earlier, sort of the COVID fatigue is set in, and people are just, everybody's venturing out. You know, they're just
Venturing
tired.
out and inviting in. I think part
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
problem is, and with Thanksgiving coming, you know, I was thinking about it, and I wrote about this on Friday. Um, you know, we did this. We have two couples that we get together with before COVID once a month for just a dinner. And we decided to do it again when things were going quite well with COVID, but we did it outside because it was nice outside and stuff. But it was still not at all, in retrospect, not at all um, real COVID safety. And when you think about it, we're trusting that those bubbles are as safe as our bubbles. And all it takes is one person to have been less than careful.
yeah,
And, you know, it's like we've got to assume that everybody you know is positive until, and you know, I'm just hopeful that when Biden gets in, he says the right thing. It's like we've got to do a 4-week shut in, all employment will be compensated and small businesses will be sustained. But we got to do this, is the only way we're going to get this done. And then
yeah.
when the vaccine comes in, it can do its work. But oh my God,
Right.
what's the mutual aid system doing with the Yucca?
Well, the mutual aid network is more, you know, more needed than ever, right? More necessary than ever.
Right.
And we're part of the cities and counties response with CARES Act money, right? So we're doing, you know, we're just getting some, we're approved for more resources along with like 30 or 40 other community-based organizations, and we're going to get the resources out probably in Instacart, what do you call, funds, so that people can get groceries delivered this month, right? And then we're working with the folks that are doing housing, and we're doing, working with the folks that are doing utilities to try to make sure that there's some coordination, right? So we're still going strong. One of the developments there, though, and this is very typical of this mayor again, is going outside the community to bring in an outside entity to manage things that could have been done locally. So we've got the mutual aid work, right? We've got as part of that, we've got the Share My Check fund, right? So they got all this CARES Act money, and they went to an outside organization called the Family Independence Initiative. They're a national nonprofit, to come in and manage what mutual aid and Share My Check was doing, basically. Right, so they're the ones that got like almost a $2 million contract with the city, basically to distribute and do things that we, the network of organizations, have been doing locally. Right? I don't know if they're from Philadelphia, but and I know people that work with them, right? So it's not that they're bad people, but it's why not invest in local entities, local organizations, local talent? You know what I mean? Same thing with the what do you call, the hotel or motel that they're buying for housing support. Have you been following that?
No, not really.
So part of the CARES Act money and other resources are using it to buy that hotel, the Santa Fe Suites, I think it's called, out there behind the Albertsons off of Zia and St. Francis. So they're buying the Santa Fe Suites, and they're going to make that part of the housing support infrastructure for Santa Fe, both for folks that are experiencing homelessness or folks that because of COVID, find themselves in precarious situations. So just using that as part of the whole infrastructure of housing support here in Santa Fe. But they're looking for they've got some national organization that they're going to contract to manage it, right? It's like, why not work with local folks? And if any one coalition or organization can't do it, help support. This is part of the civic infrastructure stuff that we're talking about. Help support local development, right? Local talent development. Bring 2 or 3 organizations together, support them, and to develop their capacity to do these big projects, right? Instead, they keep bringing these outsiders. That's part of an extractive economy, right? So anyway, so we're still going strong with mutual aid and all the work that we've been doing. Yucca is shifting out of the electoral and going legislative. So that they're working on their legislative agenda along with other organizations,
Right.
primarily around climate justice and solar and things like that. Let's see what else.
I just want to tell you, one of the very first people I met when we moved to Santa Fe was Bianca, and she was Earth Care was just transitioning. It had been primarily, we're going to plant gardens at the schools and educate people about ecology and climate and things like that. And she has definitely pivoted and injected the justice into climate action. And very proud. I'm just so pleased with what Yucca and Earth Care are doing these days. It's just, and it's a shame that this administration in Santa Fe couldn't see the wisdom of helping expand that capacity and Earth Care and Yucca's reach by investing those funds, those CARE Act funds, in a local organization like you guys. It's just shameless. Missed opportunity.
And they it's not like they're excluding all local. We're all sort of still part of the system, right? We'll be referring people into this process, but it was a great opportunity to build, again, local, and it didn't have to be Earth Care, right? The mutual aid network is a group of organizations that could have invested in that, right? And build a capacity at that level. But
So if people want to find out more about Earth Care and Yucca, how can they do that? And where would you encourage them to direct their funds?
so for supporting the mutual aid network, go to www.mutualista.org. And then Yucca also has its own website, which
Can you repeat that, the email address, I mean, the website address, because you broke up just a little bit in the middle of the word.
okay, so it's www.mutualista.org.
Mutualist. Okay.
Yeah,
And
mutualista.org.
we'll definitely do a blog in the next few days about your work and definitely about the asphalt plant, and maybe take a few shots at the city for missed opportunities, because that's what we do. But thank you very much for joining me, Miguel. Stay safe, stay healthy. You're truly an important piece in the puzzle here for getting things.
Yeah, so are you, Paul. And
Yeah.
say hello to Roxanne, and hope we can get together one of these days.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to actually shake hands or hug? But
That'd be good.
So to our listeners out there, remember next week we'll have Executive Director of the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, Virginia Necochea, and longtime attorney for New Mexico Environmental Law Center, Eric Jantz. And until then, please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Peace.